being a brand that I think can really be a go-to for pushing the whole industry forward when it comes to more sustainable food options for all, like truly for all, and making it more accessible.
Caitlin Magental is the founder and food waste warrior behind Pulp Pantry, a sustainable snack brand building the next generation of CPG made better for people and the planet. Pulp Pantry's flagship product is a line of veggie chips reinvented, made from nearly 50% upcycled ingredients, providing nearly a full day's serving of fiber in each bag. Leveraging a unique sourcing model, in 2020, Pulp Pantry upcycled 50,000 pounds of fresh vegetables that would have otherwise gone to waste. Pulp Pantry is helping adults and kids alike make better, value-aligned food choices without giving up the snacks they love. Pulp Pantry launched in online retailers including Thrive Market, as well as West Coast retailers including Whole Foods Market and Target. All right, we are here today on the Gravity Podcast with Caitlin Magental, and I am happy to have you on and get to know you and hear more about your story. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as we talked, we like to start at the very beginning and hear your full journey, starting with your kind of earliest memories and what you can share with us related to your childhood and your family upbringing and where you're from and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up north of Chicago in a few different areas, but mainly a town called Winnetka. A super beautiful place, and went to, the public school system over there. We're lucky because not all parts of Chicago have great schooling, and I'm sure so many people are familiar with a lot of the stories they've heard in the news about Chicago Public District. But grew up and went to actually a big school called New Trier, and this was my high school. It was about 1,000 kids per class, and I think growing up in Winnetka was it was a very sheltered environment for sure. It was predominantly white, not a lot of diversity, but really, something that at least kind of set me on the path I am today was actually right before high school. And I wanted to bring up my high school because it does kind of bring me to, I think, where I've landed in Los Angeles today, and in kind of a certain fearlessness, I guess, about, wanting to try bigger and better and kind of keep on climbing on and pushing on. But in 8th grade, I went to a Woman in Science Day, and it was something that was offered through our school. I had kind of had this liking towards science as a career. And in this Woman in Science program, we went to Argonne National Laboratories, which is essentially one of the biggest national laboratories just north in Illinois of where I had lived, and joined a bunch of, basically female scientists at Argonne National Laboratories, where they talked really about the issues that they saw in the science field, and with a lack of diversity, essentially, and a lack of kind of female leaders in science. And around the same time, I had gone with my mom, who was ultimately super supportive. Of course, my parents were both always very concerned with career. That was always their top consideration, as many parents are. They wanted me to go to a good school. They wanted me to get good grades. I was kind of on that, I would say, linear path in a way. But she was super supportive of the fact that science had been kind of an interest area I'd really taken to. I think, both of them just wanted to support whatever they saw their kids taking a liking to, and really push them that extra mile to get a little bit more deeply involved. So let's take me to Inconvenient Truth, the famous Al Gore documentary. And it was through that documentary, and I kind of laugh when I say it, because I think a lot of people, remember when Inconvenient Truth came out and kind of the fear tactics used in it. But I remember coming out of that movie and being like, this is the thing I want to dedicate my life to. I want to dedicate my life to communicating climate science with the general public, because I felt like there was this, this urgency to it, of course, the climate crisis, and learning more about really what was happening with our climate was just something that got me really invested. But I also noticed that a lot of my peers weren't necessarily aware of the issue or talking about it. And this was, back, I graduated from high school in 2011. So this is in the earlier 2000s. And yeah, I think, from that really few pivotal moments going into high school, I was able to focus most of my energy on some of those science-based classes. And I also started actually volunteering at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. And that was really honestly just kind of what set me on the path of where I am today. But I know we didn't get too much into family dynamics or any of that. So if there's any other questions you have in that realm, happy to answer them. But at least, as it relates to really where I feel sitting with you today, like where I feel that kind of chain of events came from, it really stems from some of those key moments early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is definitely important for us to dive into. And I do want to back up, a little bit further and kind of understand, what you remember, prior to kind of the interest in science. Was there something that kind of happened before that? Was there some sort of what were you like as a kid? Or you mentioned a little bit about your parents and their focus on schooling and grades and careers and that kind of stuff. Tell me a little bit more of what was it like as a kid? What was the kind of family dynamic? Did you have siblings? What was all of that like? I find it to be very interesting, just kind of to really understand kind of how this person really emerges, and really hearing it from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm the oldest child. So that definitely comes with, I think, a few personality traits that you pick up. My sister is 2 years younger than me, and I have a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me. We were all really close. I actually remember, my sister and I mean, we shared a room until we were, going into probably 7th grade, something like that. We always shared a room, and through that process, I mean, just developed really similar. It's the best. You have the best friend while you're growing up. But actually, we were kind of the two evil. I mean, I was always a really sweet kid, and definitely was not a troublemaker by any means. I think no one from my family necessarily was until my brother came along. And my brother, the funny thing about him is when he was growing up, my sister and I were always, of course, we were doing, I think, what a lot of kids kind of do in that age, which is playing with dolls and trying to, fit some like girly molds, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera playing all the time. And I remember when my brother came along, it really threw things for a curve, of course, because here comes this kid who wants to play with his older sisters. And so that's actually one of the things, like family dynamic wise, that's always been really funny is truly just seeing how much of a bully little girls can become. Because I think I look back on that day and I'm like, wow, there is a side of me that was kind of this tyrant, like, really taking on the older kid personality and kind of bossiness. And I know whenever he would try to join us, we were known for kind of just being pretty ruthless with dressing him up in a dress and makeup and things like that. So we had a lot of, we were a little mischievous with him, but yeah, it's been amazing because like as we've grown older and even in high school, I think as we all went through our own phases of like the teenage years and whatnot, we did grow apart a lot and not spend as much time together. Of course, I think that's kind of natural, and you're more invested in what are your friends up to. You're wanting to like fit in with your crowd, and family becomes kind of the back burner priority. But, my dad is pretty Catholic, and we always had that kind of family. He's very Catholic, and he's also very Italian. And he grew up in Pennsylvania, a small town in Pennsylvania. My mom grew up kind of all over. Her dad was in the Navy, so she traveled a lot and moved around from Texas, Indiana, back to Michigan, where I think she spent most of her childhood. But it's funny because, my dad coming from this like very Italian, very Catholic family, I remember whenever we would go back to Pennsylvania, you would see how close-knit the family was forever. Like the grandpa still lived with the aunts, still lived with the, some of the other relatives in this house that they had built like back in, who knows when. And they always were, very church oriented, very like family meal oriented. And so he tells us stories of that kind of upbringing. And he did bring that back into our household. But I think, as every generation moves along, like we get almost farther and farther from that, it seems sometimes. But yeah, so we grew apart a little bit, but, we've kind of come back to center actually, just as all of us have been graduating from college. And, I'm 28. I just turned 28 on May 7th. So just a few days ago. And my sister is 26. My brother now is 22. And yeah, he's, oh my gosh, yeah, he's 22. So wow, that's this. How many year difference? 6-year difference. There we go. But we've all kind of come back together, which is really interesting too. And I think that's, just a testament to, I think family's always really mattered a lot to me. And it does require, effort and upkeep, especially as now we're all moving out of home and, my family's back in Chicago. I'm out here in Los Angeles and my sister is actually out here in Los Angeles. So that's been something that, has really been a grounding thing for me. I don't really have, I'm super privileged to say that, my family was one of the most supportive environments. They always were pushing me to invest more in kind of what I took interest to. And really, really the dynamic was pretty healthy overall. And I think as I've gotten older, I've learned to just appreciate that so much more because that's not a privilege that everyone has. So,
yeah, it's not really. And, it's interesting in kind of hearing the stories that I hear on this podcast. I've been kind of getting some clarity that there's usually, and this is generalizing, but it's usually one of two stories, one that is very loving and supportive, and one is a little more chaotic for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't mean there's not love and good intentions in both, but one seems a little more supportive and stable maybe, and loving being a theme that I hear, and that oftentimes creates a path for young people and as adults, especially young adults, especially that, is a little bit smoother, maybe a little bit more courageous, adventurous, free,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
The other takes a lot more kind of twists and turns. And, from my experience, neither one of them is necessarily like the, silver bullet to everything being easy and great, right? I mean, life is life. Challenging things are going to come up no matter what your childhood is and what your upbringing is. But there is some kind of commonality, and I'm starting to maybe hear that a little bit in your story as you describe that you've got this kind of, what sounds like a fun, loving sibling, relationship. Sure, there's, the stuff that comes with that, but a lot of support from your parents. And, before we kind of move on from that, I'm just curious, if you could maybe speak to, in hindsight, I mean, as you don't know what you don't know as a kid, this is just your life. But, that support, you mentioned having some real gratitude for that. Maybe you could just do a little bit more. I like to highlight the really, the people that are, in my mind, like doing it right, that are really, loving on their kids and supporting their kids. And, you talked a little bit about how you had an interest in science and your parents had an interest in your career and what you were going to do. Yet, there was a lot of support there for your interests. So maybe you could just speak a little bit to the kind of support that you got at that age.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not really sure even for them, like where all of that came from necessarily, but I think, both of them came from families that were really close knit. And so that's a super charismatic guy. And I've noticed that with even his friendships. And that's something I've really admired with just looking at him and how he maintains his relationship. Still, he has an email chain with he played baseball. He played baseball at Northwestern. And one of the things that, came out of that was 5 best friends. It's a little crew of them. And I see every single day that they're emailing each other back and forth. And I just can't, I'm like, do you literally talk to them every single day? He's like, yeah, without fail. One of them is going to, message in the group and we're going to chat about what's going on in their life. And it's interesting because my mom is definitely not quite as much like that. She definitely has, she's focused 100% of her energy on her kids, which is something that like, just, when you think about the sacrifice and dedication that requires, it's really crazy to me to see some mothers who take on that full burden of like raising their family. And my dad was traveling a lot for work. He was always like running around across the country, across the world for meetings, and oftentimes wasn't there during, let's say, like the weekdays. And so my mom really did take on that burden fully herself, and she loves it. I mean, she's like, she's super close to us and one of the most kind of selfless people in that manner. But I'm also like, it's interesting because I think for me, there's certain aspects that I take from my upbringing, like definitely just the desire to keep in touch with people and the desire to like have really meaningful connection with people who you've crossed paths with in your life. Like I definitely hold on to the people that I care most about. And I think that's something I definitely get from my dad. There is a certain like, generosity and selflessness that, I saw in my mom. And there's definitely, I think, types of people who would take advantage of that, I think, as kids and grow up to be maybe expecting a little bit of that, ongoing. But I think for me, it's at least like taken on almost that same spirit. Like I love hosting. I love, there's a lot of aspects of what she kind of taught me that I think have brought really positive qualities that I see in myself coming from her as well. But yeah, I think shout out, you're totally right. Like shout out to the people who are doing it right. I mean, it's not about like stifling your kids, and it's not about trying to control what they can and can't do. It's really about enabling in a lot of ways. And I think that's what my parents really did a great job at. They were enablers, and they, I was never turned off from exploring something that maybe didn't align with their own goals and interests. I know my dad like really wanted me to go into, more of the business and consulting world as I got older. That was really where he was pushing me. But both of them just wanted to see me love what I do. And I think that was the most important thing to them, is like, we want you to be happy, we want you to love what you do. And so that was kind of how they, I think, centered also the way that they invested in certain hobbies for us growing up, like the science and kind of push us a little bit further, each of us really.
Well, it's interesting, we can kind of touch on this as we move through your story, because you end up in business, right? But you come at it from a different perspective. So, let's talk a little bit more about the science part, and just maybe speak to like, what was it? Can you like put a finger on like, what was it when you think about science? And you certainly, were inspired by, the Al Gore documentary. And I think that was a wake up call for a lot of people. I'm curious to hear a little bit more. I'm actually kind of fascinated with that. It's pretty amazing that, you end up, those are the sparks, right? And sometimes that's how it happens. And depending on what you believe, there's kind of a woo-woo, belief around that, which I hold, which is that like those things aren't just like coincidental, that they're like brought into the world to really inspire and move and call. It's a calling of sorts. But maybe you could just speak to kind of how science came into your life as a calling, and maybe a little bit more about, that moment when you saw the documentary.
Yeah, I think, it was the sense of urgency and responsibility, but also a little bit, I think it was like a sense of urgency, responsibility, and simply a sense of privilege, honestly, that, I had grown up in this. I think I definitely saw a lot of wealth growing up, and I saw a lot of excess growing up. And so, looking at a documentary like An Inconvenient Truth, and seeing how not only our climate was being affected, I think, by the way that we were leading our lifestyles as humans, like as a human race, but on top of that, it was how that was affecting other people in other parts of the world, and maybe in places where, we didn't have direct contact or communication, or, we didn't have that. I think most people don't have that sense of like responsibility to the collective in a way. And I really felt that deeply. Like I felt a sense of empathy and wanting to just make sure that, we all could live, we could all support each one another's like livelihoods, basically by being the most responsible responsible human as we could. I don't know. That's kind of a weird way of putting it, but I guess communicating climate science to the general public to me was a way that hopefully we could instill a little bit more. Hopefully, we could speed up the process really of people waking up to the fact that we are all connected by the home we share, and also by one another. And like the suffering in the world is something that I think some of us really do feel deeply, whether it's looking at the news and whatnot. And I don't know if that's a specific trait that some people have, or just something that we all need to work on accessing a little bit better. But we're all connected in a sense. And I definitely felt like, the best, highest use of my time and interest and passion and like what I wanted to dedicate that to would really be just finding a way to help people live in light of I guess like the kind of pending climate crisis that we were already starting to see like the clear signs of.
And I'm just curious, that kind of sense of responsibility and connectedness and care for something outside of yourself, the home that we share, the collective suffering. Do you think that is something that was inside of you? You mentioned maybe it's inside of all of us. Was that fostered in your environment? Where was the kind of like first sense of that? And do you have any sense as to where it was coming from? Is it just who you are?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a little bit. I think each of us kind of has maybe a predisposition somewhat to kind of leading on that more emotional, empathetic, like feeler. I mean, we have the ENFJs and all of those Myers-Briggs personalities. Like being someone who is like very feeling is. I don't think that's something that comes necessarily natural to everyone, but I do believe that when you really sit with something long enough, like you can start to develop some of those same, I guess the same like depth in feeling of responsibility. Let's say like when we really dive into a news article. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I would love to hear your perspective. I do feel like some of us are predisposed to it, but I also feel like with all that we're exposed to now with the news and the access to information, like, you can kind of tune that out easily. Or you can also, I think, even as someone who maybe isn't naturally like kind of the most empathetic or feeling personality, like there's no way that most of us can read some of the news articles that come out about just what's happening in the world and not feel some sort of sense of like wanting to help or wanting to lend a hand to those in crisis. So I think it kind of is a mix of things. I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very complex thing, which I don't really know what the answer is. Maybe none of us do really, if we're being honest. But my sense is that we're all kind of born into this kind of purity that would be a loving energy, that would be kind and empathetic and, care about the collective and want for our, species and every aspect of life, to be treated fairly and lovingly and safely and, and with health and, all the things that like, why wouldn't we I have a hard time believing that anything else would be, kind of, brought into this world. Like why, unless it was, maybe there for us, to learn, which sometimes, I think might be true too. Mostly what I think happens is that it's, this is exactly why I like to kind of talk about the very early parts of people's lives, right? Because mostly I think what happens is along the way, you get different conditioning and you have different experiences, and those start to get embodied and maybe take you away from that. In some cases, they're tragic, they're traumatic. They might really take on a whole worldview, a way of being, that is maybe not your essence. And maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's not true. Maybe people are just who they are, and they're, they have choice and they're choosing to live a certain way that feels
Mhm.
within alignment for them. And maybe I'm just, wishful thinking, but I
Yeah.
truly, I really do just honestly hold the belief that, we're all born that way, and then life
Hmm.
happens, and it's, maybe part of our journey to really come back to that. And,
Definitely.
sometimes that happens sooner rather than later. And sometimes maybe it never happens, but that's my belief.
Yeah. I think, some of the traits that I took out of my upbringing definitely were a lot of trust in people, a lot of a lot of faith in people. I think I'm a very hopeful and kind of positive leaning person. So um, it can be there are so many events that happen in life that can bring a person down. And I've seen a lot of that just in peers and whatnot, like people who've survived really great like traumas that I could only imagine, having to go through. And I've seen them come out and be stronger because of it a lot of the time. So, I still, and I mean, it's not everyone, like, I mean, there are different responses, of course, to every sort of triggering event. But I do think that we're such a resilient creature. Like, we've got so much, um, we've learned to adapt to so many changes in our environment and obviously with technology. And we really are, we are really a resilient, kind of a resilient force. So it is interesting just to see how, how those traumas have sometimes like honestly brought out really good qualities in people and
Yes.
kind of built up that resilience a little more too. So I definitely have hope that everyone has the potential to rebound and hopefully take a silver lining
Hmm.
from something and find support elsewhere too. Like, I think there's a lot with my family that I'm so lucky to have that supportive environment, but I have a lot of friends who don't have one of their parents or maybe are not close with either of their parents or have been kind of like distanced from them. And I've seen them really take their friendships as that supportive kind of family dynamic and really hold on to that. And that's been something that, I definitely take to heart too, is just family comes in so many forms. Supportive relationships come in so many forms. Doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. It doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be necessarily from your family either. And I think as humans, like, we are a generous kind of, we are generous and we are by nature like attracted to community, and community can take so many different forms too. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I,
so
I
yeah,
want to. I'm curious about the summit community, but I'm going to hold that
yeah,
thought for a minute and just take me through, your kind of next steps. So the science
yeah.
comes in, the interest, the doc. Then what is that? Do you go off to college to study? What? Tell me a
Mhm.
little bit more.
Yeah, I definitely. So I knew that it was, focused on climate. I went to University of Southern California to study environmental science, and um, I ended up being able to get a full ride scholarship there, which was really um, how I was kind of looking at University of Miami because they have a great marine biology program, and I thought marine biology might be kind of a more interesting facet, like ocean ocean health, and ended up at USC mainly I think because of that the scholarship opportunity and some of the like perks that just came with building that kind of that community of scholars at USC, and lived in kind of the dorm where it was almost like the students that had received like some sort of financial aid or we all lived in basically one dorm. So it was really interesting just because it was an environment that people were there to focus on their studies in a lot of ways. Like, these were people who, came to USC with a specific interest in any type of field. So I was surrounded by people who were, maybe they were business majors, but they had already launched and kind of started working on a business during their time at school. And I was around other science and engineering majors, um, and just like a lot of really diverse thinkers. So it was a really cool environment to be in, at least my kind of first year at college. And it was interesting because I did dive into my coursework for the first about 2 years of college. I was like fully focused on that. I did the max amount of credits I could do. Like, I'm sounding like such a like goody two shoes, but I loved academics. Like that was just something I was so passionate about always. Even in high school, like I remember, my friends couldn't imagine that I loved reading or studying as much as I did. So I was kind of weird in that way, but definitely, going through college, it was the same thing. Like I loved my studies. I always took on as many classes as I could. And
let me just ask you, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just curious on that point. So was that a love of learning? Was that a passion for the subject? Was that some sort of like desire to excel and, perform? What was that love of the work? Tell me a little more about that.
I guess a mix of all three of what you just mentioned. I think you put that in such a great, you put that in such a great way, because I definitely, there is like some level of it is just trying to be an achiever and perform. And I think a lot of the ways that I judge myself and grade myself was based on some of those external grades you would receive in school. And for me, that was a place where I put a lot of self-worth, was on my ability to perform in those subjects and get good grades and whatever else. But the other side of it was definitely, I think I was more driven, honestly, by just a love for learning. Like I did really enjoy most of my classes. I think the only ones I didn't love necessarily were maybe like history and writing or some of, things. I think we all have different ways that we, I loved math. I loved science. Like those were kind of really the fields that I always felt myself like sticking the most to. But, I think that kind of carries on today, because honestly, like a lot of the ways I judge my self-worth is what am I achieving with my career? And like, how much am I learning every day in my career? Like how much am I pushing myself and feeling like I am advancing in a sense? So like moving forward for me has always had to be kind of a theme. And I'm definitely pretty hard on myself about just making sure that I feel like I'm building towards success in some level. And it's actually not monetary for me. Like I think success to me is more, it's defined by other factors, and I want to live a comfortable life. Of course, who doesn't? But for the most part, it's definitely more focused on just like certain places where you see like, okay, I'm building something that has recognition. I think it's recognition. I was looking for the word. I was like, what is it? But whether it was grades and now in career, it kind of goes back to, I don't really know why that's so important to me, because my parents gave me a lot of recognition. So it feels like, that's something you would seek out if you weren't getting that from other places. But yeah, that's really been kind of a main driving force for me.
Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm not qualified to actually try to make these diagnoses, right? I mean, I'm just
neither am I, by the way,
hack therapist, but with no credentials. But I do find that that sometimes recognition and validation in the kind of like material sense, and not necessarily monetary, but maybe it's accolades, or maybe it's just compliments, or maybe it's something that's coming from an outward acknowledgement. Really, I think in my case at least, can often just mean like what we're doing matters. It's having an impact. It's meaning something to somebody else, and that is nice to know. It's good to get the feedback, like, hey, like this is not a waste of time. Right? This is actually what I'm doing is being recognized by other people, which means, and I mean, the recognition can come in all different ways, right? But know, kind of like intuitively, if it's the kind that you're looking for, which, I'm guessing in your case and in mine is about impact. It's about, making a difference in other people's lives, or in the community that you're in, or in the world, as a whole. And it's just good to know, like, okay, maybe I'm on the right path. I want to keep doing this. And I don't know if that's true for you, but, that's kind of what I'm assuming based on what you've said so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like, I definitely think for at least the first few years even out of college, like I was seeking a lot of that sense, like some external sense that this was the right path, right? Because you get a lot of that when you're when you're in school, you get a lot of that just from like the way that we've set up our grading system and whatnot. Honestly, like I kind of wish that we could change things a little bit in that respect, because I feel like there is a certain level of like mischievousness that leads to, I mean, I know a lot of the people in at least the entrepreneurship realm grew up like having terrible grades, C's, straight C's, never went to college. Like, it's really cool because you see kind of how a little bit of mischievous really does go a long way. And you see people who like truly never lived by the rules and never were worried about authority and never were worried about achievement by, typical standards. And they've gone out to do such amazing things. So I think it's like a balance of both. I think I leaned so far on the other side, but I still have this like innate curiosity, which has allowed me to jump into more of an entrepreneurial field and like feel comfortable building in the unknown, because it is a curious and it's a learning process for me. And there are, like you said, still external kind of points of validation that, you get along the way, whether it's like acceptance into, a big retailer that you dreamed of landing. Like, those are things that are kind of signs of like, oh, you're building a product that people are recognizing is desired in the world or and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think that's a really cool aspect of like how those different personalities can come into play. Like, I might always be fighting to get that external recognition and validation, but I do hope that one day you kind of just let go of that. And I do feel like slowly as I've gotten older, I'm letting go of the desire to please people externally and kind of tuning in a little bit more to asking the question of like, what really makes me happy? Am I building? Because, you start to realize you're like, I'm 28, I'm still young, but you start to realize that like your daily, I guess like the daily things that you're kind of doing, your activities, there's never an end. Like you don't just graduate from like you graduate from college. You don't just graduate from these different like kind of buckets of your life. Everything that I'm doing now is building towards a lifestyle. So it's like, am I building towards a lifestyle that I actually want to live, or am I still like chasing after something that doesn't necessarily make me internally happy, but maybe is like externally a marker of success. So it's just like, that's something I think all of us have to, at some point or another, you start to kind of feel that it becomes an important and relevant conversation. I don't think it ever was necessarily before, but maybe in the past year has become something that I've really been tuning into more. And I think through that question of like, what is really going to make me personally happy? What's the life I want to live and lead? Has helped me to kind of shed some of the seeking outside approval in that sense. But it was really interesting because even in college, I, even going through my studies at USC, I was definitely focused on my environmental studies, for the first 2 years. And I kind of alluded to this, but like when I was moving into really my senior year, I started realizing actually really what happened was I had been living on Catalina Island because they had a marine research center there. And I started talking to all the grad students that were stationed on Catalina Island. They were working in the labs, and I was asking them, like, what are you researching? Like, what are you working on? And kind of had been wanting to explore, like, what would a graduate program look like for me? Because I knew in order to really dive into this science field, you had to kind of get your at least your master's and potentially your PhD. But I was asking them like what they were studying, and a lot of them were studying like, I remember someone was studying like marine worms. I was like, oh my goodness, like who's ever going to read this research report on marine worms? And I kind of felt like I was going to have a very minimal impact working in this field. Like I started just having this idea of, hey, well, what if I meld my passion for science into more like advocacy and activism and public policy? And it was kind of compounded by the fact that my professor, who was the department head for environmental studies, like really sat me down and was like, I think given your personality traits and what like he's like, what I see you doing is not working. He really told me, he's like, I don't see you working in the lab. He's like, I think that you won't be happy there. I think that you need to think about how, maybe you can take a more like people oriented approach to what you're trying to do. And I think like, thank goodness that I think he gave me that, again, validation that my kind of concerns were probably right on point and that I might not be happy working in a lab, because I started doing public policy classes. I took a minor in urban policy and planning, and that actually led me to social entrepreneurship, which is what I ended up, of course, kind of pursuing from a career perspective. And it was really a curiosity that kind of drove me there.
Yeah, I think that curiosity, you spoke about it, and I think you said even like, being mischievous. It's a very interesting thing to me because I really see that. I did go to college and graduated from college, but I also was a C student and,
Mhm.
very mischievous and, for a lot of reasons. But I see it even in some of my kids' friends who are very smart and very high achieving and also mischievous. And,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that like, what we don't do is know how in the educational system, and this is
Mhm.
maybe generalizing because there's amazing teachers out there like the one that you just shared, but there's not enough of that. There's not enough of recognizing
Mhm.
like who's the individual, and maybe how can
Yeah.
we teach them or guide them or coach them or support them and using who they naturally are to create and be, that in a productive way. Usually
Yeah.
what happens in the educational system is it's like you kind of get put in a box and there's a certain boundary in which you need to study or focus or behave, and
Yeah.
we see things as like good or bad based on how you're doing within that box. And
Mhm.
I love to hear that story about your teacher because what it sounds like he or she did was just see you and really
Mhm.
then affirm you and give you kind of the confidence to pursue what you had maybe
Yeah.
been feeling but weren't sure of. And usually when you're not sure and you're young, and depending on that kind of security that you have, that inner security, which it sounds like you had enough of, going back to maybe your childhood, you may or may not kind of pursue what you think you want to, and if
Yeah.
you don't, you usually pursue what you think you're supposed to, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But tell me a little bit about then, okay, so this kind of social entrepreneurship comes in and you've got this support coming in from a number of different ways. So what happens? You do you go
Yeah.
right into your current business, or are there a number of kind of entrepreneurial attempts, before?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like I definitely was like kind of a weird experimenter growing up with a lot of career oriented things. Like I always had some sort of extracurricular focus. Like I was lucky because I think I asked my parents, I was like, can I do this like abroad program? Basically, and basically every summer after sophomore year of high school, I would do these summer programs where it was like just exploring some interest area. And it was kind of my choosing. So I definitely, even traveling abroad at a couple points like during my high school journey, which I think a lot of kids don't necessarily get a chance to do that. So when I went to college and when I was going through kind of these questions about my career, I also took advantage of the opportunity to go abroad and study a few different interest areas that would still kind of correspond to some of my environmental studies coursework. So I remember like basically having to sit down with the academic chair for the School of Sciences at USC, and I was just like, hey, I kind of am having this feeling that I want to. I just basically gave an explanation like I want to meld kind of climate science with communicating to the general public, either through advocacy, through policy. I wasn't really sure what it was yet, and they were really supportive of that, luckily, and actually allowed me to swap out some of my environmental studies course credits for other classes that maybe didn't even have any relevance. So I remember like taking a few entrepreneurship classes that, they were like, well, as long as you focus kind of your projects on something that's like sustainability related, then we'll let you like swap that out for credits towards your major. So I got to kind of, pick and choose a few classes that maybe weren't necessarily like on this strictly like environmental science path so that I could still graduate with my degree in environmental science. But really, the social entrepreneurship was so interesting was, there really was a light bulb moment. I was working in a nonprofit class that was offered through that minor. And it was, because I thought that it was potentially that I wanted to go into nonprofit work. And one of the things that we had to do was get actually an internship in the community at a nonprofit. It would be unpaid, but it would go towards your course credit. And so I was working at an urban garden that was attached to an elementary school. And it was a Title I school where kids were on primarily the free breakfast, free lunch program. And I started noticing like kids were coming to class eating Twinkies and Cheetos, and at school lunch, pizza sauce and French fries counted as your daily vegetable. And it was the same time that kids were coming into the garden and they were seeing a fresh carrot or fresh tomato for the first time. And these are elementary school kids. They're pretty young. But to me, that was just like, oh my goodness, like what are we feeding our kids? Like at lunch, they're not even seeing they're not even seeing vegetables kind of in true form. And they're relying on their schools for 2 of their meals of the day. So I was really blown away by that. I wanted to figure out like how we could, it was kind of just more of like access to healthy food. I was like, this is just really wrong. I think that, especially when we drive through certain communities in South Los Angeles, it's like there's a lack of grocery stores, there's a lack of fresh food available or healthy food available. And it leads to so many community health issues that really set communities back. And I also noticed in the schools, like kids were having trouble focusing. And there were a ton of things that like we would talk about as teachers in the garden specifically, which was like a nonprofit program that really was operating out of the school as part of their curriculum. But the teachers would talk about that too. Like how do we hopefully like, we were even talking about like how do we bridge the fresh food from the garden and kind of bring it into some of the school meals. That wasn't really possible given the meal contracts that the school district had. So anyways, food became an obsession to me. And it was like really the connection between healthy people, healthy environment, and really how that all kind of connected through the similar thread of food. And then I was at a friend's house, saw her juice a carrot the same semester. And I was like, okay, here we have the issue of a lack of access to healthy food. And over here, I have a friend who drove miles to go get organic carrots, is juicing them, and has more than half of the vegetable that's going to waste and doesn't know what to do with it and just throws it away. So, it was actually kind of a connection between those two issues. And given my background in environmental science, which helped me when she was juicing the carrot, I actually took notice. I was like, that's a lot of waste. And I was like, what are you going to do with that? Like, I couldn't believe that she was going to throw it away in the trash. And then on the other side, seeing kind of a lack of access. And I think that's kind of where we see like how so many of the different choices and kind of the path that our life has taken gives us a unique eye to just notice problems in the world and notice like things that maybe other people would quickly glance over or not really take like a true awareness to, given each of our unique paths and our unique perspective and our unique experiences. And I think each of us does have this like different type of way we're observing the world. And so for me, that was something that, observing that issue or both of those issues was why I wanted to build what is now Pulp Pantry, or my business, which really is kind of that connection of where are really nutritious resources going to waste and how can we use those nutritious resources to make it easier for people to eat healthy, eat their fruits, vegetables, and fiber. And I really believe that like those two things need to happen together, especially as, we're in this rapidly growing population. Like we have to feed 9 to 10 billion people by 2050 or 2025, really. And we're already at a calorie deficit in terms of like how we can feed that growing population, sustain that growing population. So that for me is like, how do we build a more sustainable food system has kind of become the culmination, I think, of all of those kinds of events and explorations, if you will, as I was going through my studies.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's fun for me to kind of listen to, how the different threads, kind of get woven together into where you are today, to kind of hear your whole story. I mean, it's pretty great to kind of now know how you've, again, woven all of that together into Pulp Pantry. And so, tell me a little bit about kind of, we'll tell the listener more about Pulp Pantry, because I know you're on Thrive, but otherwise you're mostly West Coast today, I think, right? So talk a little bit about the products and, maybe a little bit more about kind of the entrepreneurial journey that you've had with it and maybe, I don't know, ups and downs and where you're headed.
Yeah. I mean, today Pulp Pantry will always be I will say like a platform for new innovations that bring fruits, vegetables, and fiber to every category of the grocery store. So we started with veggie chips, and really what we're focused on there is looking at areas where nutritious resources are kind of unclaimed. Like, we look at the cold pressed juicing industry, and we work with essentially national juice chains that have centralized like facility that they're processing all their organic fruits and vegetables, but they have all the byproduct, which is the fiber that normally, they're trying to find either composting contracts for or giving it to animal feed. But it's just highly nutritious stuff that I think could go to better use feeding humanity. So we work with them directly to make sure that those resources are going to good use, and that we're also bringing healthier versions of, I think, the staples that so many Americans rely on. In our case, it was looking at the veggie chip or chip category and being like, how could we reinvent what's typically starch and grain based and make a crunchy, delicious snack that would resonate with kids, especially made from vegetables. So, it's been an exciting first product to bring to market. But like you said, it's been primarily West Coast focused, and we really are focused on building strength in the LA, SoCal market before expanding out. But currently we're available pretty much across the West Coast in Target, as well as in Whole Foods in Southern California. But, I would say in terms of where the business is headed, it's starting with this product line, but it's looking at other categories in the grocery store where we really could do better for consumers and for more sustainable options. And I think it's a mix of both, whether it's through packaging innovation, like bringing compostable packaging to the market. We're working on a solution for that right now. And it's just really thinking about the full life cycle of our food, not only where it comes from and how many, and kind of the resources that we're extracting in order to feed the population, but it's also the end of life cycle, right? And where does our packaging go? Where does the trash go? How do we fight food waste in consumer homes? Like, being a brand that I think can really be a go-to for pushing the whole industry forward when it comes to more sustainable food options for all, like truly for all, and making it more accessible and not making it something that's out of reach or only available in the nice neighborhoods in town, but it's like making products that will speak to the broader base of American consumers.
Yeah, great. I love it. Well, it's really a great way to kind of land. I think, you've really followed this kind of internal passion that you've had for science and for making a difference in the world. And, for the collective, the healthy food, I think, people are learning more and more about, and just the importance. I mean, there's certainly been kind of an onslaught of documentaries about that. Right. And just the importance of kind of what it does for our earth, and also what it does for our health, mentally and physically. And so it sounds to me like you've really used, all of your experience to land on something that makes a lot of sense and is really a great way to spend your time, and a great, also, not something that can be quite profitable, and that you can have a lot of success with, which is important, because people like you are going to do good with profit, and so I'm a big believer in conscious capitalism, and really kind of using our skills to create in a way that does create good capital that can get put back into the system to create more great outcomes and products. So that's what you're doing, and that's terrific. And before we wrap up, just tell me, because we have Summit in common, and I know that you spoke to the importance of community, and that's a pretty phenomenal community, one that I've been engaged with since 2009, I think, was my first Summit event. So I'd love to hear your experience with Summit.
Yeah, I'm a part of the fellows. So it's a group of Summit fellows, and essentially they're all building some sort of impact or, change in the world, whether that's through a nonprofits discipline, through entrepreneurship. There's a lot of different ways that people approach, and different problems that these individuals are tackling. And I think for me, that's been such a supportive and inspiring community to be a part of. I mean, I derive, not only friendship, but also definitely inspiration from the people that I've met at Summit at large too. And I think sometimes having those closer knit, built-in programs, for example, Summit Fellowship, I mean, that has been something where, it's a lot of time that you get to spend with these people, and kind of really diving into what everyone's building. And I think it's amazing to talk about ideas, and it's amazing to talk about, the businesses that we're all building or the nonprofit that we're all building, because it does connect so deeply to someone's like core purpose in life. And I think when you bring those things to the surface and you're able to talk about, the things you're most passionate about in the context of whether it's Summit, which is, largely focused on those kinds of meaningful connections and conversations, it's just really cool because, you do leave feeling so much energy and an inspiration to go forward. And I definitely keep in touch with all of the friendships that I've made from Summit. I have people to visit all around the world now, and I know I'll always have a bed to stay in or a couch to sleep on. And it's really exciting to just think about like kind of the I guess the possibilities of building alongside people who really align with, I think, those core values and the want to like give back to their communities or to a cause that they care about too. So that's just been something that I've really derived a ton of support from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Me too. It's been fun.
Yeah.
We've had Jordan Davis, who's a fellow as well. And we're about to have a whole another group of fellows on the podcast. And Summit series for me has been a kind of continued thread of inspiration and community. And, from the very beginning, my first exposure to Summit was a bit of a aha for me about just what was possible. So it's wonderful that you've had such good experience, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with me today. Any final thoughts on to share with the audience? We'll make sure to kind of post links and where to find you and all that kind of fun stuff. But any other final thoughts to share with the audience?
Well, just thanks for listening, and I definitely appreciated the conversation. It's a good way to spend your Monday morning, and I love kind of thinking. I love the themes that you're talking about. Just thinking back to how each of us kind of came to be who we are today, and it's a constant process of evolution. But there's definitely a lot to unpack there. So thank you for spending some time with me this morning.
Wonderful. Thanks for listening to the Gravity Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and follow me on Instagram at Brett Kaufman, on Twitter at bkaufman125, and subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching for The Gravity Podcast with Brett Kaufman. And please send me a DM with any guests or topics that you'd like to hear on future episodes.